Hey guys, it is Saturday here on Pagan Perspective. I'm your host Brendan, and this week we are talking about pop culture pantheons. So I encourage you to go watch the previous videos this week because there's been some amazing information on different ways to interact and relate to pop culture pantheons. Kara already touched on Alice in Wonderland, so I might briefly touch in with that a little bit, but I'm pretty much going to present a whole bunch of lists of, for me, that from TV shows and books and everything, characters that would particularly make up pantheons that I could work with, or that I encourage other people to work with. Pop culture is definitely something I love. I'm a complete nerd and geek about a whole bunch of different things, especially like anime and books and graphic novels and all that sort of stuff. So let's just get into the topic, and I will give you a whole list of different pantheons that you could potentially work with and the ways that I kind of viewed that they could be worked. So let's start with one of my favorites, something that I'm a total nerd boy about and fan really about, is Sailor Moon and the Sailor Scouts, and they would be a perfect pantheon. So working with like Sailor Moon, Sailor Mars, Sailor Mercury, Sailor Jupiter, Sailor Venus, Sailor Neptune, Sailor Uranus, Sailor Saturn, Sailor Pluto. Then also working with like Luna and Artemis, who are the cat's companions, so Luna being Sailor Moon's companion and Artemis being Sailor Venus's companion. You also work with like Chibi Moon, you could work with Tuxedo Mask. If you wanted to do like dark aspects, you could work with Beryl and all of her like ally knight creature people, and there's a whole bunch of options within that. And then there's like, as you follow the story through, the characters develop more and become intensely powerful beings, and just the powers that they hold. So if you wanted to draw on particular things, so if you're working with death, you might look at Sailor Saturn. If you're working with time, you might look at Sailor Pluto. If you're working with love, you'd go to Sailor Venus. If you're working with purification and cleansing, you might go to Sailor Mars. If you're working with like fluidity and water and like messages and intellect, you might work with Mercury. That sort of thing. So there's like a plethora of deity, god creatures that you could totally work with in there. And it's like a whole heavenly host of goddesses and a few godlike beings in there. So the next thing, if you're more like an animist and that you work with animal spirits and nature and revering that, I looked at the universe of Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. So in this universe there are 4 nations: the Earth Nation, the Air Nation, the Fire Nation, and the Water Nation. So each of them is connected to a particular element, so as listed. And there's a group of people that have a latent skill within them called bending, so they can bend those elements. And then there is one born in every generation that and cycle within one of those elements. That is called the Avatar, and they are the bridge between the spirit world and the human world, and they have the ability to bend all 4 elements in that. But there's stories within the universe of The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra about the original first bender, Wan, and how they got their abilities. There's some spoiler warning right here, but got their bender abilities from the lion turtles. And it was then that people who had bending abilities learned how to master them by going to the 4 different like guardians of each of the bending elements. So for Earth, it's the badger moles. For water, it was the moon and the sea. For fire, it's dragons. And for air, it was the flying bisons. So if you work with animal spirits and nature, you might want to work with those particular 4 beings there. Then you could also work with like the lion turtles, who pass that power and knowledge into people. So pretty much it's like a spiritual download into accessing those bending skills. Or you might look at like the Avatar, so being that balance between the spirit world and the mundane human world. Now, reaching back into my childhood in pop culture, Captain Planet. So looking at 5 teenagers that are each given a ring for a different thing. So there's Earth, Fire, Wind, Water, and Heart. Particular things that you may work with in there. Then you also have Captain Planet themselves, who is pretty much I think like an activist deity. So if you're really working in activist work, you might look at Captain Planet. And then also within the story, you have Gaia, goddess of the earth, is very present within that story. So there's really like a great universe of pantheon that you can work within that. You might look at your casting circles, instead of calling the elements, you might work with earth, wind, fire, water, and heart sort of thing. So heart might be your center there. Then going into like geeky nerd comic book stories, the Lantern Cores. So you have red is rage, you have orange is avarice or greed, you have yellow, which is fear, you have green, which is will, blue is hope, you have indigo, which is compassion, you have violet, which is love, you have black, which is death, and then you have white, which is life. So there's this kind of like, if you want to work with concepts as archetypes or deities, there's also that kind of universe there, and then each of the different Lantern Cores has a particular group attached to them. So the Green Lantern Corps and all that sort of thing. So there's particular people within that represent those embodiments of those qualities that you could always work with. Shifting up into something that's kind of more current and also old at the same time. So Neil Gaiman's American Gods. An amazing book that I love. And then following on to that, you have Anansi Boys, which is in the same universe. But it looks at when people migrate to America, they brought their gods with them. And it's about how those gods, the old gods, are existing within a place of new gods as well. So if you're watching the series, it's freaking amazing. I recommend it highly. But you can work with characters like Mr. Wednesday or Shadow. You have Media, Mr. World, Technology. There's a whole bunch of other characters within the story as well. Vulcan appears. You have Ostray or Ostara. You have, I'm pretty sure Anubis is in there as well. There's the Jinn. So there's a whole bunch of different characters within there that you could work with that are gods already, but in a modern pop culture twist sort of thing. And sticking in with that kind of modern pop culture twist thing, the next one is a graphic novel series that I absolutely love. I think it's about 16 books long sort of thing, but I've grabbed the like omnibus, which is split into 4 sections. But there's a series called The Wicked and the Divine. So it essentially follows the story that every 90 years, 12 gods are reincarnated into human bodies, have full access to all the powers and for 2 years, and then they die. So in that process, the current incarnation, they become these amazing pop stars, really. Like, well, I say pop stars, but I mean like artists, performers, that sort of thing, and they share their power by performing, and it's really amazing. So there's Bast, and there's Persephone, and the Morrigan, and Baphomet, and Odin, and there's a few other gods within there. There's Asamaru, I want to say that's her name, but like the Japanese goddess. Yeah, a whole plethora of different gods within there that you could look at from a modern stage, and the graphic novels actually have a series of amazing, beautiful images of all these gods that you could always put up onto an altar and create. Following on with books and writings that also now have movies and TV series sort of thing, Terry Pratchett. So the whole entire universe has a plethora of different gods. The one that comes to mind easily was Hogswatch, which has like the Hogfather, which is kind of a twist on Santa Claus sort of thing. You also have Death is a very prevalent character within that series and universe. You have the old god of hangovers. You have the Tooth Fairy, which is very present there. And then you also have like Death's granddaughter, Susan. So she's kind of like part mortal, part god sort of process. So you have like a demigod in that series. So there's like that kind of exploration there as well. And then to follow on with what Kara mentioned, Alice in Wonderland. And so you have characters like Alice, the White Rabbit, the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, the Dormouse, the White Queen, the Red Queen, the Queen of Hearts, the Cheshire Cat, the Jabberwocky, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, a whole series of characters there that you could work with. And like that's more in like, what Kara said, a kind of an archetypal sort of process. So you might work with Alice as being kind of like the fool within the tarot's journey. You have the White Rabbit as like a guardian of time, really. the Mad Hatter is kind of, for me, like a Dionysian sort of character, so very much madness and insanity and kind of just crazy, really. It's like those three together kind of encompass that. So like the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, and the Dormouse are these kind of like Maenadic Dionysian creatures. The Red Queen is very much like Red Queen and White Queen are that kind of counterbalance, calm madness and fiery madness. And then you have the Queen of Hearts is really, I think, like jealousy and rage. So there's kind of those aspects that you could work with in there. And then I think that's all I have listed in my phone, at least, that I wrote out when I was looking at this. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Something that I was also thinking about for gamers, you might look at Skyrim and Elder Scrolls. You have like the Daedra, who are like the deities and spirits within that game series that you could potentially work with. So there's always that particular storyline there. So there's a lot of mythologies that are created specifically for games that could be accessed and worked with. Book series that have that sort of thing. Graphic novel series that have that sort of process. Game of Thrones might be another thing. So looking at the old gods within the Game of Thrones and the red trees and all that sort of process. But yeah, really just get out there and have a look around. If you have a particular series, like there's lots of anime series that have gods and everything through that whole entire process. You can look at like Naruto and the Nine-Tailed Fox and all that sort of thing. Yeah, there's so many things. The Care Bears. You can look at the Care Bears and work with each of those different Care Bears and their qualities as particular deities or archetypes to work with. The Ninja Turtles, if you wanted to work with that particular process. Something else like the Pokemon. Pokemon universe really has like legendary Pokemon in there. There's whole entire creation stories about how that universe was made. So you could potentially work with that. I've done pop culture rituals with Pokemon as creating sacred space. So using, I think it was like Pidgey for air, Charmander for fire, Bulbasaur for earth, Squirtle for water, Pikachu was spirit, and we cast a giant Pokeball. Yeah, just kind of like a combination of just everything out there. So it's all about really how you want to adapt and work with that, and I encourage you to explore and just kind of see what happens. And there's a lot of connections that you can make with current modern pop culture characters that could be linked to ancient deities within story, essentially. So Kara did mention like particular superheroes, so like Thor and Loki having connections to their actual Norse god sort of thing. Well, it's the whole like Valhalla is touched upon within that story there. And then also if you look at like Storm's origin story and from X-Men, she's seen as a goddess within her culture because of her abilities and powers. So there's potentials anywhere for that kind of connection, really. And I think you should just go out and explore it and see what happens. And there's so many characters within series that we revere more than gods themselves, sort of thing. So it's easy enough for that to be a devotional practice, I feel. But that's it for this week. I hope you like the list that I've put up, and if you have any more suggestions, feel free to put them in the comments section below, and I will see you next week for our next topic. But for now, much love and blessings, and have a good weekend. Mwah!